Hey guys, welcome to the Not Too Popular podcast, a podcast giving a platform to the most unpopular opinions in our society. Maddie and I met over our mutual love for water. Yes, you heard that correctly, water. And we quickly discovered our similarities
and differences.
Because we're often told that we're too feisty or overly opinionated, so we decided to flip the script and use our voices to create a platform for strong opinions and personalities.
Our goal is to ignite hard and respectful conversations about anything and everything. On the Not Too Popular podcast, we talk about everything controversial, from food to politics. Join us as we get real and honest about touchy subjects, keeping an open mind and open heart to new ideas, opinions, and experiences.
Before we dive deep into this episode, we want to quickly tell you a little bit about how all the magic happens. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast, hands down. Let me explain. It's free. Need I say more?
There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. No fancy, expensive microphones or recording studios required. It's a great way to get your podcast started right away.
Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard instantly on popular podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so many more. The best part? You can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's literally everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. And we are rolling. How do you pronounce it? Is it data or data?
Hell if I know.
Well, when in doubt, Google it out.
Data.
Okay, so it's data.
Sure. I use
That was
50-50.
So I was watching The Social Dilemma on Friday night.
I haven't seen it yet, but I do have my own opinions on it.
I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about this.
Let's talk about it. What were your main takeaways from Social Dilemma?
So I guess the main thing is when it comes to selling and sharing data, they just have so much control over, what we're seeing and what we as a society basically is viewing. And I don't know if I'm super comfortable with it. It just seems kind of intrusive and manipulative a little bit.
I think when people started first developing social media, they had no idea what it was going to turn into. And they wanted free platforms that somehow they had to make money. And they were gathering all this data, and at some point, and my guess is at first they just had data that was on your profile, and then cell phones started becoming more robust, and they were able to collect more data that cell phones were already collecting. And at some point, an easy way to do that was people are already buying ads. People buy ads on specific locations and newspapers, or in different circles. You can buy an ad for a half-mile radius of Walmart in LA, a specific Walmart. And that's data that has been collected that is on your phones because that person is there all the time. Maybe they live there, maybe they go to that Walmart frequently, and that's their target audience. So they're collecting this data, and an easy way to make money to keep this platform to be free and user-friendly for everyone is to start selling that data. And potentially they do collect too much data on us. That isn't technically the social media apps usually. That is usually your phone. And you can turn it off. And the rest of the data that social media is collecting is the things that you choose to post. If you go on your Facebook, it'll tell you what political affiliation you are. For mine, it used to say Republican, and I can guarantee you now it does not say Republican. And yet, we're complaining about the data that we're kind of freely posting. We have the ability to turn off a lot of the data that they're selling. And so we're making a big deal about something that in a lot of ways is user created. And if we don't like it, we need to put our money where our mouth is. Like marketers, I know I work on a marketing team, and we do buy data. We also collect data. Anytime you see something where it says accept cookies, cookies are collecting your data on a site. So if you click accept all cookies, that's something that is based on the California Consumer Protections Act, CCPA, which is something we're dealing with work. Like if you're collecting any data in the state of California, you have to have an accept all cookies. And usually you have to, I believe you have to also be able to read what accept all cookies means and the cookies that it's collecting. And there needs to be ways to collect consumer data to release ads, otherwise you're just kind of getting pointless ads all the time.
Yeah, but with the cookie thing, isn't it kind of like, shouldn't we as the consumer be able to opt out of having our data shared? Like, I guess that's kind of why. Because when I go on sites...
that is why the California Consumer Protection Act came to be. And I think it should be in all states. One thing is like when you're making a social media app, people will be like, well, why don't we accept all cookies for a social media app? You do when you're making an account.
Yeah.
They have the terms and conditions. It's your right to read that.
But nobody ever does.
Nobody ever does, but is that the fault of the user? Is it the fault of a company that's trying to keep a product free for its consumers?
Well, imagine if people did actually read through it, before they actually, and then if they are not able or they don't want to do that, then they wouldn't download the app. Like a lot of people might not download the app, and then therefore it's kind of on the app people.
Right.
So I don't know. It's just like this fine line, I think, that we're kind of still figuring out and like toying with because it's so new. Social media is still very new. And the internet even.
And it has grown so quickly that it's become this monolith of apps that nobody really expected to be as big as it was.
Yeah.
And Facebook was started out as a way for Harvard students to see each other's profiles.
Yeah.
It's become a worldwide thing where half the friends I have I made through Facebook, including you.
Yeah. Yeah, we met on Facebook.
We met through Facebook,
in a group.
yeah. And so there's so much beauty, too, in social media, especially during a pandemic.
Yes.
And being able to meet people who are like you. And, I mean, even, like, getting suggested groups on Facebook, your data's getting collected, and you might be missing out on friendships because they never collected your data to suggest a group to go into.
That is true. And I mean, that's obviously the positive side. I think there's, of course, positives and negatives to like each side of social media in general and data collecting and all that. But I don't know. I guess I'm kind of more neutral. I don't know if you're leaning more one way or the other, but I'm a little bit more neutral. Like,
I'm fairly pro data selling depending on how much data is collected and what is collected. And more than that, like, from a developer standpoint, it can be kind of concerning is, like, what if that data gets breached and someone other than a marketing affiliation gets that data? Or what if the government gets that data?
Right.
And for me, I'm a boring person. It doesn't really matter. But there are people who really should not have their data collected or really don't want that or really have a stronger opinion on that than I do. And in that case, I think, you make your own decisions. Do you want to be on it or not? When I first started developing, my friends and I were kind of concerned about going into data selling because realistically, at least in some point of all of our careers, we're going to be either on the side of marketing where we're buying data, collecting data, or we're going to be on the side of mining data to sell. And I have some friends who work in that field, and we were trying to decide if ethically we can work in those fields. And we all kind of came out with different opinions on that. I would say where I came out is as long as people are aware that at some point your data is being sold, it's not that big of a deal because the data is relatively harmless. And more than that, with the data breaches, we're coming out with things like blockchain where it becomes almost virtually impossible to break into your data. It's incredibly hard to mine data from blockchain, and that's why we're using software like blockchain or Ethereum, where that data, when we think of blockchain, we think of money, but there's so much more to it. There's a security side of it becomes really, really hard to get that data, any kind of data, not just money. And so when we use technology like that, it compartmentalizes and makes it incredibly hard for someone to hack that system. Basically impossible. And so I think that's one thing that concerns me about data selling is the data can be breached at this point. Eventually that probably will be virtually impossible. And so that's a little bit more concerning than it just going out to marketing. Because for me, I'd rather see advertisements that work for me. If I'm gonna buy from an advertisement, but also from an advertising perspective and from an entrepreneur's perspective. If I'm wanting to build a business and I'm running ads, I want to sell it to, or send it out to people that it's relevant for, and actually, you know, be able to grow my reach other than just like sending out to pointless people.
Yeah.
And I feel like if anyone's in the field of marketing and is running ads, then you should know that you're buying data. And if you're not okay with your data being sold, then you shouldn't be okay with buying data either. Like, it's very hypocritical to buy an ad, but to say, oh, but I hate that social media is selling my data.
Yeah. What is this, so this software that you're talking about, that's out already, or?
Yeah, if you hear of blockchain cryptocurrency, Ethereum blockchain, it's very complicated, and I could sit and listen to it all day and still not really have any kind of grasp. And that's coming from someone who works in software engineering. And partially that's because I'm not super passionate on the subject. People who are very passionate about it, my brother is in a software engineer, and he loves talking about it and kind of understands it because he's so passionate about it. But for people who aren't passionate about cybersecurity or cryptocurrency, it becomes a very abstract concept to talk about. But basically it's compartmentalizing data, and it makes it really, really hard to get data. Blockchain is like blocks and chains, and it's a different way to store and serve data. And you have like serverless data too, or serverless apps. And so, which is what Ethereum is, I believe, is it's a serverless app. And it does add and increase security. And all this to say is like our technology is more robust than it's ever been, which is a good and bad thing, but it is keeping our stuff more secure than it's ever been too. And so it is becoming harder and harder to breach data, which is a great thing. And like, we don't worry on a day-to-day basis if our bank account is going to be breached. And if it is, it's usually on the user's fault for somehow leaving their password. Like, I don't worry about, I work with US Bank. I don't worry that US Bank is going to be breached one day and all of our accounts are going to be gone.
I kind of worry about that, but maybe I'm just paranoid.
I would say it's probably a little bit of paranoia. And yes, it might be a viable concern, but have we heard of it happening in modern age? At least in a larger scale. Maybe one or two people because they accidentally wrote down their password or something.
Oh, yeah. I guess that...
But that's a user error and not on the application's fault.
Wasn't there some scandal, like, maybe, like, I don't know if I should call out the bank, but, like, a very major bank, like, a few years ago that had a data breach, though?
I'm not going to call out the bank. So, the specific bank has had a lot of issues, including even last week it was in the news for something else.
Of course. And
so, in that case, I would call it faulty management because they just keep coming out into the news for different things. And I don't even think that one was like a data breach. It had something to do with their allocation of resources. But I don't remember the exact details, but I do know which bank you're talking about, and they keep messing up. And I'm so thankful I'm not with them, because when I was looking at changing banks a few years ago, that was when all that was coming out, and I was like, well, I'm not going with them.
Yeah.
I'll go with anyone else but them. They sound like a hot mess.
Yeah. I guess, like, I don't know, banks is like such a sensitive thing. Like, I mean, in theory, your entire savings, like anything in your checking, CDs, whatever, could just be wiped out. That's why I'm afraid of like cryptocurrency. And I mean, I don't know.
Cryptocurrency is definitely a lot more protected than a bank.
Interesting. How so?
Cryptocurrency is like, if you don't have access to it physically, basically, like on a thumb drive or something, you pretty much can't get it.
Oh. So it's not like cloud based or anything? I mean,
Not
I don't
really.
know.
There is something called cryptocurrency mining, and that is pretty much like they actually release money out into the wild for people to mine. But it's not mining someone else's money. It's kind of just like a fun thing for developers almost.
A fun thing.
But it's actually really expensive to mine data because it uses so much server space, and servers are expensive, and it uses a lot of power. And so it's not really worth it for most people. I had a friend who was running cryptocurrency mining, and it was more expensive than what he was actually mining to be able to run the servers and to be able to run a computer all the time to run all of these different numbers. And that's a thing with hacking too, is it's, you know, you see in movies like the Hollywood hacker with their black hoodie like, over their head and typing super quickly. Like, coding is so slow. I talk like 5 words a day, if that sometimes. And I mean, sometimes maybe I'll be able to write a full function in a day, but usually I'm fixing stuff, and like, hacking just isn't like that. And there are very few people who actually hack, like in the true sense of hacking into data. That there are like red teams, so like a Tesla, let's say, where you have a automated car that could become a weapon if someone hacked into that. They would have something called a red team and a blue team. And the red team and blue team, usually they don't know each other. And the red team hacks in the system and finds holes, and the blue team tries to protect the system. I would guess something like Facebook has this too, to protect data. They might have a few red teams and blue teams for the different apps because they also own Instagram and other apps that somebody would be trying to hack into the data. Or in Tesla's case, the computer, and try to run the computer. They actually had something where I think it was like a Russian hacker almost got in a few weeks ago.
Oh.
And a little crazy. Which is a little bit scary. Like, a car could become a weapon easily. Especially when you have like a fully automated car that can drive itself. And that is a concern. And yet technology is increasing so quickly that it's not something that I think we need to worry about on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Because there are people, that's their job to protect those systems and to find those holes before someone with bad intentions comes in and destroys lives.
Yeah. That makes sense. So you haven't seen The Social Dilemma. Is there a reason behind that?
Time, and I also am just, like, I do like documentaries, but I think documentaries are usually very one-sided and don't actually see both sides. And I think that's a marketing scheme to polarize things. And like, this both and isn't very marketable. That there can be good in social media, but also like the side of, there's things we need to work on. Like, I genuinely believe we need a governing agency of some sort to come up with rules and regulations that social media should follow, both regarding data selling, but also regarding kids in social media and what kids can access and see, and also cyberbullying and like all of these things that can create such a negative experience for users and increase depression. Like, I think we do need a governing agency. There are, and this goes back to like, social media has grown so quickly. I don't think anyone ever saw it growing to this level.
Yeah.
When Mark Zuckerberg was creating Facebook, it really was just for Harvard students to see other students and meet other students. Who knew it would be the largest social media platform? And yeah, like, I don't go on it that much anymore, but there was a time when that really was the largest. And I think today it still is the largest. Maybe Instagram surpassed it, but Instagram's owned by Facebook, so at the same time, it's the same thing. They have all the same data.
I guess, like, in comparison, I don't know why, but for some reason in my mind, I think that, like, Facebook is more dangerous, air quotes, dangerous, than Instagram as far as data collecting. I don't know why. I think it's just, I mean, you see ads pop up on both, but there's just something, like, with Facebook. It's so much more, like, news-driven.
Yeah.
So I think that's why, like,
it's
it really...
also more personal. Like,
yeah.
I'm a very private person across all of my platforms. I know you probably can't go on my profiles and see that much about me, but I am a little bit more political on my Facebook. I'm also more political probably on Twitter over than any platform. Twitter, I would almost say, is the most dangerous. Like, people don't really expect that much about it, and they kind of let their guard down.
Yeah.
And there have been times where I'm like, send out a tweet, and then the next day I'm like, because I only have like 65 followers, so at a certain point, what does it matter? And then I'm like, you know what, I don't really want anyone seeing this or knowing this, so I'm gonna go ahead and delete this. And yeah, I mean, that doesn't take it off the algorithm. Like, that company still has that data. Data is never truly deleted from the internet, but at least no private person. I'm more worried about private people seeing my stuff than I am about the corporations. I mean, there is the side of like, what happens if you get in trouble with the law, even if it's not your fault, and they're trying to get that data to find out more about you. That's concerning. One thing to know about Apple is like, Apple products are super secure. I know a lot of like geeks really love Androids. I'm a geek and I love Apple because there have been times where like there was a shooter in San Bernardino a few years ago, and they were trying to get into his phone, and Apple would not open up the phone, which is both like, okay, maybe they should have.
Yeah, I think
in that case
situation, yeah,
I do kind of agree that they should have just given it up, but like, it's really hard to get into an iPhone.
Yeah. And
Apple isn't going to help anyone get into your iPhone without a true warrant, and it's really hard to get a warrant to get into people's stuff. I mean, that was probably like five years ago, but I remember that happening and being like, wow, so my data's pretty secure with an iPhone. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, like, if the FBI can't even get into some of your stuff, like, how much do we really need to be worried?
True. I do feel like protection, you know, there's like the wallet now, and you can like pay just like scanning your phone over something. I do feel like that is pretty protected. It's more so when I'm like on my laptop is when like there's viruses and like all kinds of other stuff. I mean, I'm not techie in any way, shape, or form, but
that's another thing. Like, Apple's have less viruses than Windows.
Yeah.
And so like with Windows, I would encourage anyone who's on a Windows computer is to keep your virus protection going and maintain it. Sometimes I notice with my work computer that's Windows that the virus protection goes down every once in a while, so you have to go in and make sure it's running. And Apple, I've never had a virus with. Would you say you've ever had one?
No, I don't think so.
Like, that's partially because they tend to protect websites, and my computer had to turn it off, but there's a thing called SSL certificates on websites. It's like anytime you see that lock next to a URL, that has an SSL certificate or a security certificate.
Oh, okay.
Like, I know we're building our website right now, and I don't have that lock on there.
Is that the thing where it's like HTTPS?
Yes,
okay.
HTTP or HTTPS. I always like get caught up in how to pronounce that. It's really hard when you say both of them at the same time. But that is a certificate that says like, hey, the site is secure, you can trust this data. I had my computer for a long time, and I think it was just like inbuilt into Apple. Like, I don't think I ever turned on that I could not go to a website easily if it didn't have an HTTPS or SSL certificate. I had to turn it off because when I was developing websites and I was deploying them, I didn't always have time to get an SSL certificate or the money, because it can be expensive. If you don't want to go through the time process of an SSL certificate, you can just pay a decent amount of money to get the certificate. And so, like, money is time. so most of the time I'll do that, but when I'm broke or don't have time, I need to be able to see my own website that I'm building.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like SSL certificates, I have my computer, and I think it was just with Apple that it would not go to any website without an SSL certificate. And that you can change those settings if you don't have that on your computer. I think you can do that with Windows too, but that will protect your computer from a virus. And any site that Apple views as potentially dangerous too, you can have those settings. Like, I'm sure you've been to a website where your computer's like, are you sure you want to trust this?
Yeah.
And that keeps you from getting a virus. And so there's different ways, but usually Apple doesn't get viruses.
So just kind of wrapping up, what are some like tips and tricks of like how to protect your data from, getting stolen?
I wouldn't would say I'm more worried about private people seeing things that I stupidly posted. And so like making sure when I'm on social media that I'm not posting where I am every day. I'm not posting my running route every day. I mean, that's so dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
Never post your running route, especially if you do it frequently. Even if you do it once, never post like the times. Like if you're posting somewhere, I would almost wait a few hours of where you went. So that way, like I went to an ale house the other day. I posted a picture probably like 3 hours later. And that's also a good way to like be present in the moment. It's not just, you take your pictures, post later.
Yeah.
But that's safer too. Like I genuinely am more worried about stalkers than I am about my data being sold.
Yeah.
I think that's more of a realistic worry. But with the data selling, like you can go in, at least with iPhones, and turn off a lot of the data that it collects. There is still going to be data that's collected on your Facebook, but that's based on what you post. Same with Instagram. And so, like, there's ways around that. If you are worried, like, I don't turn that off because I just kind of don't care. I'm a boring person. Does anyone actually care about my data? Yes, they're collecting it, but there's so much data in the world and not enough data scientists to actually mine all that data and format it into something useful.
Yeah.
We have more data in the world than we've ever had before, and not enough people actually doing something with it because there just are not enough talented people who know how to work with data and know how to visualize data and know how to collect it and how to format it into something useful. Data is arguably the hardest part of my job because I have to do something with it. I have to format it. It doesn't just come in a way that I can just push out into the internet. I have to manipulate it. But I would say that the biggest thing is just what are you posting that other people can see? And that comes in the perspective of we have different opinions on social media. I'm a more private person, and I also think social media is toxic, but I think that's from the user side. So would you say social media, like, I know you enjoy social media and you don't think Instagram's toxic.
Ooh. Well, thanks guys for tuning in to this week's episode of the Not Too Popular podcast. If you have a not too popular opinion on this episode or an episode topic, slide into our DMs on Instagram or Twitter, and be sure to follow or subscribe to this podcast for new episodes every Thursday.